vow made to frontier children, once spoken with conviction, now tasted like dust and regret. When the silver beneath Redemption Gulch finally failed, so too did the fragile civility of the men who depended on it. The schoolteacher, Mara Whitlock, was left standing alone, branded by a lie, cornered by the same cruel choice the West offered to all who fell out of favor: rot where you stood, or gamble everything on the open land ahead. She chose the open land. This is the account of her 100-mile march across the brutal Arizona territory, a punishing journey, driven by stubborn will and memories she refused to bury. It is the story of how, with death already closing its grip, she was discovered by a man as unyielding and unreadable as the desert itself, a wealthy rancher of Apache blood named Rael, who would either be her deliverance or the hardest truth she would ever learn. The sun came down like a blacksmith's mallet, and Arizona was the anvil. For 4 relentless days, Mara Whitlock endured its blows, her resolve hammered thinner with each mile. The town of Sanctuary, a word that once sounded like mercy, remained nothing more than a mirage beyond the wavering heat, supposedly 60 miles away. 60 miles beyond the 40 already behind her. 100 miles fueled by blind faith, shattered leather soles, and a hope that refused to die quietly. Her ordeal had begun in the hollow shell of Redemption Gulch, a town born loud and muddy, carved from red earth by the promise of silver. Mara had arrived from Philadelphia the year before, carrying more books than clothes, her heart swollen with Eastern ideals, and a belief that learning could tame even the wildest edge of the frontier. For a brief while it had felt like a miracle. The one-room schoolhouse raised by her own hands rang with the uneven voices of miners' children reciting letters and sums. She taught them reading and arithmetic. They taught her endurance, the quiet strength of families surviving one bad strike away from ruin. And ruling over that knife-edge existence was Silas Crow. Crow held no official title. He did not need one. He owned the mine, the store, the saloon, and by extension, every soul drawing breath in the gulch. A man all sharp lines and patient menace. His pale eyes missed nothing and forgave less. At first he tolerated Mara's school. It kept wives' calm children occupied. He even tossed a few dollars toward a new slate board, a gesture that felt less like generosity and more like a ruler flicking a coin at an entertainer. Then the silver thinned, and the town's heart began to fail. Daily halls shrank, faces hardened, hope curdled into bitterness. Fists flew more often in the saloon, and credit vanished overnight from Crow's store. Desperation hung heavy in the air, thick and sour as cheap liquor. Mara's wages, drawn from a fragile community fund, were the first to disappear. Still she taught. She accepted potatoes, patched dresses, or sometimes nothing more than a nod of gratitude. She held fast to the promise she had made those children. But Silas Crow saw her stubbornness not as devotion, but as defiance. A dying town had no need for ideals. It needed stripping down to bone. The reckoning came without warning. One evening, as she swept the schoolhouse floor, Orrin Pike, a deputy whose loyalty leaned heavier toward Crow's coin than any badge, burst through the door. He accused her of stealing bacon flour laudanum from the general store. The charge was absurd. She had credit she hadn't touched in weeks, choosing instead to mend and ration. Yet Pike sneered, flashing forged receipts in the lantern glow. "Clear as daylight, miss. Your signature plain as sin." In that moment she understood. It was a lie, clean, efficient, final. To challenge it meant standing against Crow himself, and in Redemption Gulch, that path led straight to a grave. Crow wanted mouths gone. He was dismantling what remained of his kingdom, and she was excess weight. Her choice was simple: face a circuit judge owned by Crow or vanish before dawn. So she vanished. With a small satchel, a spare blouse, her father's battered copy of Shakespeare, a half-empty canteen, and a pouch of hardtack, Mara Whitlock walked out while the town slept. She never turned back. Looking back meant admitting her dream was dead, and she wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. Anger carried her the first day, stubborn resolve the second. By the third, her body began to rebel. Alkali dust scorched her throat, every swallow a torment. The sun flayed the skin at her neck raw. Shoes built for cobblestone streets were shredded by jagged stone. The land was brutally beautiful. Saguaros standing like silent guards, mesas burning purple and gold at dusk. But beauty here was a lie, masking a core of merciless hostility. By the fourth day, instinct alone drove her forward. Rage burned away. Hope dried up with the last drop in her canteen the day before. All that remained was the crunch of ruined souls against gravel and the relentless noise inside her own mind. She saw their faces drifting up through the heat. Benji Moore gap-toothed grin flashing as he struggled through his letters, and little Lottie May proud as sunrise, because she could already write her own name. The memories cut deep, a cruel reminder of a life ripped away. The world wavered, her sight slipping. The horizon smeared into motion. Saguaros bent and swayed like warped reflections in a carnival mirror. Her foot caught on a loose stone. Her ankle rolled hard. A thin cry tore from her throat and vanished into the wind before it could echo. She forced herself upright, bracing against a sun-bleached boulder. Her sensible gray wool dress was ripped at the hem, soaked through with sweat and dust. She was no longer Mara Whitlock, the schoolteacher, with clean hands and careful words. She was prey-driven forward by a land that showed no mercy. 3 more steps, that was all she managed before her legs folded beneath her. The darkness didn't take her. Instead, the world exploded into white, searing blinding. The ground slammed up, sharp gravel biting into her cheek. Her final clear thought wasn't of sanctuary, nor the life stolen from her, but the bitter irony choking her breath. She had come west to bring light where there was none, and now she lay alone, fading, beneath a pitiless sun in a country that did not care. Dust settled over her like a waiting shroud. Then came water, not swallowed, not poured, but pressed cool and damp against her brow, easing the fire in her skull. Next came motion. Arms strong beyond reason lifted her from the burning earth. She caught the scent of leather and horse sweat, and beneath it the clean wild bite of sagebrush. A voice reached her low and steady, but the words dissolved into noise, swallowed by the roar in her head. She drifted weightless, carried on a dark and merciful current, pulling her back from the edge. When awareness returned, it brought silence and shadow. She lay on a bed, a real one. Coarse, clean sheets brushed her sun-scorched skin like silk. The room was cool, the heat held at bay by thick adobe walls. A single plain window framed a slice of indigo sky, the first stars pricking through dusk. This was no miner's shack, no trail shelter. The air felt settled, anchored. She tried to rise, but dizziness pushed her back into the pillow. Her throat still burned, but the grinding rasp was gone. A cup of water waited on the bedside table. Her hand shook as she reached for it, drinking deeply. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside, outlined by lamplight from the hall. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, moving with a quiet certainty that seemed to draw the stillness toward him rather than disturb it. As he came closer, starlight traced his features. His face looked carved from canyon stone, sharp planes, hard lines. Thick black hair was tied at his neck. But it was his eyes that held her. Dark, sharp, unreadable. He was not white, that was unmistakable. Copper-toned skin, high cheekbones, a jaw set with pride and restraint. "You're awake," he said. His voice was the same one she'd heard, through fever-low, measured, deliberate, every word chosen before it was spoken. Where am I?" Mara whispered, her voice barely sound. "Coyote Springs Ranch," he replied. "My land." He lit the lamp beside her. Warm light filled the room, revealing its spare solid make, heavy wardrobe, plain writing desk, nothing wasted. Everything here had a purpose. You were found a mile from the northern spring. He continued studying her without pity or curiosity. Just fact. Another few hours and the buzzards would have noticed. You were fortunate. She flinched at the blunt truth. Thank you, she said. The words felt thin. You saved my life. He inclined his head barely. I found you. The desert decides the rest. He pulled a chair from the desk and sat, wood creaking beneath his weight. My name is Rael. The name itself meant nothing, but the way he spoke it suggested it should. Mara Whitlock, she answered. He glanced toward the folded dress on the chest. You've traveled far dressed like that. You didn't come from Sanctuary. It wasn't a question. No. I was heading there from Redemption Gulch. At that, a flicker crossed Rael's eyes, brief, sharp. Redemption Gulch is finished, he said. The silver's spent. The rats are abandoning the hull. I wasn't running, Mara Whitlock replied, a spark of old pride flaring. I was driven out. Rael studied her without change, a stillness about him that felt unsettling, patient in a way that seemed older than the room. He waited for more, yet did not press. The door opened again. An older man stepped in, face mapped with deep lines, frame bent but tough as wire. He carried a tray with a steaming bowl. Boss, he said in a gravelly drawl, figured she'd be awake by now. Smell of this could rouse the dead. He set the tray across Mara's knees. Pale blue eyes met hers with an unexpected kindness. Name's Bram Cutter. I run things around here. Take it slow, miss, your belly ain't ready for steak yet. Thank you, Mara murmured. The savory steam made her ache with hunger. Bram nodded toward Rael. Doc'll be here by morning. Sent Reed Holloway the minute we got her back. He looked to Mara again. You gave us a scare. Folks don't usually walk out of the salt flats. Rael rose. Rest, Miss Whitlock. We'll talk more tomorrow. He turned away. Bram followed, drawing the door nearly shut, leaving a thin bar of lamplight. Alone, Mara cradled the warm bowl, heat seeping into her chilled hands. She was safe alive, but safety came with a new kind of uncertainty. The desert had spared her, only to place her beneath the roof of a man as remote and untamed as the land he ruled. And Apache, she guessed from his features, yet his English was flawless. His name, Rael. He owned this ranch, a place of order and weight, and men like Bram answered to him. He was a contradiction she had no strength to unravel. She took a careful spoonful. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. As warmth spread, she understood her trial wasn't finished. It had merely shifted into a deeper, more tangled chapter. The following days blurred into recovery. Wallace Keene, a portly doctor from Sanctuary, with sweat-dark collars and gentle hands, came and went. He declared her badly dehydrated and malnourished, treated the burns on her neck and face with soothing salve, and ordered rest and food, both plentiful at Coyote Springs. Meals were simple and steady: stews, fresh bread, eggs, strong coffee. Silence enforced the rest. The ranch lay like an oasis in a broad valley, green pastures thriving where the surrounding land lay dry and hostile. She learned the main house anchored a sprawling operation. From her window, she saw corrals, a big barn, and smaller adobe quarters for the hands. Low rocky mesas curved around the settlement, shielding it from the worst winds. Her host remained distant. Rael appeared at breakfast and supper, taking the head of the long, heavy table. He ate quietly, eyes on his plate, yet Mara felt his awareness track every sound, every movement. As she suspected, he carried Apache blood. Bram filled in details one afternoon on the porch. His ma was Apache. Pa was a white trader. Died when Rael was a boy. Sees both sides of the fence and trusts neither. Bought this land years back because he knew where the water ran. Folks called him a fool. But water's everything. He's rich in cattle, sure. Richer in water. The truth only deepened the puzzle. A man of two worlds, yet wholly claimed by the one he'd built. The house mirrored it, adobe walls and woven blankets, simple pottery, and a broad shelf packed with leather-bound books. Dickens, Plato, engineering, and geology. He was educated, self-made in that regard. A library that would shame many back east. On the fourth morning, feeling stronger, Mara Whitlock rose early and dressed in the clothes laid out for her, steadying herself for whatever came next. She found Rael on the porch at dawn, standing still as the sun climbed and washed the eastern mesas in rose and gold. A mug of coffee steamed between his hands. "Morning, Miss Whitlock," he said without turning. "You're mending." "Because of your kindness," Mara Whitlock replied as she joined him at the rail. The air was cool, clean sharp, with promise. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." He turned then, dark eyes cutting straight through the courtesy she wore like armor. "Repayment belongs to merchants. I saw someone in need. I acted." "I still owe you," she said, then settled it with an answer. His voice shifted slight but firm. "You said Redemption Gulch forced you out. Who did that?" Mara hesitated, the memory of Orrin Pike's sneer, flashing hot and vivid. "The man who owns the town," she said. "Silas Crow." Rael's face stayed calm, but a muscle tightened along his jaw. "Crow? I know the sort. He stripped the strike to bone. Why trouble himself with a schoolteacher?" The words spilled from her, then false charges, forged receipts, the choice between a cell and exile. She waited for anger, for sympathy. Rael only nodded, gaze drifting back to the horizon. "You became a liability," he said, a reminder of a community he no longer wished to sustain. "Crow is orderly. He prefers loose ends tied." The coldness of it struck her hard. "It was wrong," she said, voice rising. "He ruined lives. He lied. He threatened. He endured," Rael answered evenly. "The West doesn't reward fairness. It rewards strength and foresight." Crow took what he could, then knew when to walk away. "Your ideals are costly here." The dismissal stung. "And what do you believe in?" she pressed. "Survival at any price? Is there no place for decency, for education, for something that lasts?" He gestured to the spread of green, the distant cattle moving slow as shadows. "I believe in what can be built and defended. Water, soil, a solid fence. Decency is the law you keep inside it. Education is knowing a rattler from a bull snake. The rest belongs to Eastern parlors." Silence stretched between them, a gulf of belief. Mara felt old frustration rise. He sounded like so many men she'd met, hardened, measuring the world by power and possession. Yet he was not the same. He hadn't merely claimed land, he understood it. And he had saved her life without pause. A living contradiction. She changed course. "Your library, it's remarkable." "A man who doesn't read walks half blind," he said. "I'm a teacher," she replied, finding steadier ground. "Or I was. I brought books. I believe learning is the backbone of a real community. A town of children quoting Shakespeare who can't find water in a dry wash won't last a season," he shot back. "And a town that finds water but has no soul," she returned, "no sense of the wider world, is that worth saving?" For the first time, Rael studied her openly. The set of her chin, the fire she refused to hide. The hint of a smile touched his mouth, less guarded now. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you have a point." He drained his mug. "Bram Cutter tells me some hands have children mostly run wild. If you're strong enough and tired of your own thoughts, you might show me what your education can do." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't consent. It was a test. As he walked toward the corrals, his figure cutting dark against the new sun, Mara felt a spark she thought the trail had buried for good. The refuge was uneasy, its master infuriating, but for the first time in a long while she had something to prove. True to his word, Rael made arrangements. An old storeroom behind the main house was cleared. 2 rough benches and a scarred table were dragged into place. Bram Cutter produced a broad, smooth slab of slate. Propped against the wall, it served well enough as a blackboard. By the next day, Mara Whitlock had a schoolroom again. Her pupils were a feral little pack, 5 in all ages, 6 to 12 the children of the hands who lived and worked at Coyote Springs. They kept their distance at first, wary and watchful. Their fingers knew rope and stone better than chalk. What they carried was the land's knowledge, the meaning of a hawk's cry, which berries burned the tongue, how to follow a lizard across broken rock. Letters and numbers were strangers. Mara threw herself into the work, surprised by her own fierce joy. She moved patiently, teasing the alphabet from them, having them scratch their names in dust with a stick before they earned time at the slate. She spoke nothing of distant capitals or crowned heads. Lessons grew from what they knew. They counted cattle in the corral, learned the letters in water, and horse read simple lines about the sun and the stars that ruled their nights. Rael never stepped inside the room, but she felt his watch. Now and then, she'd glance up to find him by the far corral, still as a post, then gone. No praise, no rebuke. His silence left the measure to her. One morning, supplies appeared, paper pencils, a handful of battered primers, set on her desk without a word. Her presence softened the ranch's hard edges. Men who once eyed her sideways tipped hats and muttered greetings. The cook saved her the best bread. She was no longer the burden hauled in from the desert. She was the teacher. Purpose took root in that quiet pocket of an isolated kingdom. Then 2 weeks in the outside world came riding hard. A lone horse approached not one of theirs, but a man wearing a dulled deputy's badge. Orrin Pike looked worse than memory allowed, slicker, meaner. He rode straight for the main house with the confidence of someone expecting doors to open. Mara was outside with the children, watching them practice letters when he arrived. Her heart jumped. She swept the children behind her, fear rising sharp and instinctive. Rael came out to meet the rider, moving with the same calm, deliberate stride. He stopped at the porch edge, offering no invitation. "This is private property," Deputy Rael said, voice flat. "Just doing my duty." Pike sneered, staying mounted. "Got a warrant from the circuit judge. Arrest of one Mara Whitlock theft back in Redemption Gulch." He waved the paper. Blood drained from her face. Silas Crow hadn't released his grip. He was reaching even here. Rael didn't look at the warrant. "That paper carries no weight past 10 miles east. This is my land. Now see here," Pike blustered, hand dropping toward his pistol. "The only law at Coyote Springs is mine," Rael said. The quiet thickened, dangerous. Bram Cutter and 2 hands appeared as if from dust rifles, held loose and ready. Pike's bravado collapsed. He glanced between them, color fading. He was a bully, and he'd hit stone. "Crow wants to see her," Pike muttered. "Just talk." "If Silas Crow wants words with anyone on my ranch, he can ask permission," Rael said. "It will be refused. Leave. Now. Before you're buried here." The threat was plain, emotionless, certain. Pike swallowed, eyes skittering. He yanked the reins, spun his horse, and fled, dust boiling behind him. The children stood silent, wide-eyed. Mara's legs went weak with relief. She crossed to Rael, who still watched the retreating rider. "He won't stop," she said, her voice shaking. "Silas Crow isn't a man who accepts refusal," she said. "I know," Rael answered, eyes distant. Then why? Mara Whitlock pressed, confusion tightening in her chest. Why send a deputy all this way over a schoolteacher he already cast aside? It doesn't add up. Rael turned fully to her, dark eyes locking with hers. The mask slipped, replaced by something hard and sober. "Because this was never about you, Miss Whitlock. Not truly." He looked past her toward the green valley that fed his power and kept this place alive. "You didn't just flee a dead town. You walked straight into the center of his next design. He doesn't want you," Rael continued. "He wants to know what you're doing here, what you may have told me." "Told you what?" Mara asked, baffled. "I have nothing to tell. I don't know his plans." You know his town is finished, Rael said, voice low and intent. You are proof the silver is gone. And now you stand on the only land in this territory worth more than a mountain of ore. He let the silence settle. Crow isn't chasing yesterday. He's chasing tomorrow. And tomorrow? Here turns on one thing alone. He gestured to the emerald spread below. Water. The word hung heavy, no longer simple, but absolute. Water was the lifeblood of Coyote Springs, the secret behind its impossible green. Mara's gaze moved from Rael's grave expression to the living valley, and understanding struck like a chill. Come, he said, leaving no room for refusal. You need to see what this fight is really about. He led her on foot away from the ranch's bustle and up a winding stone path along the western mesa. Bram Cutter followed, rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm, jaw set. The climb burned her lungs. When they reached a high ledge overlooking the valley, Mara forgot to breathe. From above, the truth revealed itself. The ranch sat at the mouth of a narrow canyon cut deep into the mesa. From its shadow flowed a steady living stream, not a trickle, but a strong, constant run of clear water. It fed the pastures, filled the troughs, made prosperity possible where none should exist. The heart, Rael said quietly. This is Coyote Springs. There are two smaller flows to the north, but this is the main artery. It draws from a deep aquifer, an underground river, older than memory. It's beautiful, Mara whispered. Its power, Rael corrected. Crow's mind devoured water. He drained the red creek to reach silver. Now the creek is dead, the silver spent, and 50 miles of land around Redemption Gulch is choking. Bram spat tobacco onto the rocks. Crow's no fool, Bram said. Next fortune won't come from digging. It'll be sold by the barrel. Rael pointed east toward the ruins. He's buying failed homesteads between here and there, land worthless without water. He's petitioning the territory, arguing for an irrigation project to encourage settlement. The picture snapped together in Mara's mind, cold, precise. He wants your water, she said. Control of it. A dam at the canyon mouth, Rael confirmed. A reservoir. He'll sell water rights to settlers lured by government grants. He'll rule the valley greater than any silver baron. But this is your land, Mara protested. He can't take it. He won't take it, Rael said, bitterness edging his voice. He'll have it handed to him. He'll paint me as a greedy half-breed hoarding what belongs to the people, Rael went on. An enemy of progress. He'll bend the law, and men like Orrin Pike will do the dirty work. Suddenly Crow's pursuit made terrible sense. He sent Pike here to arrest me, Mara said, realization dawning. Not for theft, but to test you, to see how you'd respond, to set a precedent for stepping onto your land. Exactly, Rael said, and to learn whether you'd told me anything. If she had overheard any fragment of Silas Crow's intentions back in the gulch, the thought chilled her. She had believed she was escaping a small, mean tyrant. Now she understood she had wandered into the opening moves of a war, this ranch, this man standing squarely at its center. Her own injustice was a mere token, spent in a far larger, colder game. Why are you telling me this? Mara Whitlock asked, her voice scarcely carrying. Rael turned fully toward her. His dark eyes searched hers. Because Orrin Pike's visit changed the board. Crow knows you're here. He will use you. He'll name you my accomplice, Rael went on. Maybe my lover. He'll spin lies to discredit me, paint me reckless, dangerous. Your presence becomes a tool he can wield. He paused. You still have a choice. Bram Cutter can ride you to sanctuary at first light. I'll give you enough money to start anywhere you like, Rael said. Crow's war doesn't belong to you. The offer opened clean and bright, a way out. By week's end, she could be eastbound on a stage leaving dust danger, and the infuriating, compelling man beside her behind. She could return to a world where justice lived in courtrooms, not at rifle's reach. She looked down at the ranch, the small adobe schoolroom, the children she had just begun to teach. The impossible green rail had guarded for years. She thought of Crow's dead eyes and the ease with which he'd discarded a town. She thought of Rael's books, his quiet mind, the unasked-for mercy that had saved her. To run now would prove him right that her Eastern ideals were indulgence. It would admit that when true evil showed itself, her principles rang hollow. "No," she said, soft but unyielding, meeting his gaze. "I'm a teacher, Mr. Blackwood. The most important lesson I can give those children is that you don't run from bullies. It seems my fight followed me here. I'll finish it." For a long moment Rael said nothing. Wind lifted a strand of hair across her face. Then he smiled, truly smiled for the first time, warmth, transforming his severe lines. "Very well, Miss Whitlock. It appears your education has its uses after all." Bram Cutter, who had listened in silence, grinned. "Gonna be one hell of a lesson." Standing on the ledge, the battle lines were no longer marks on a map. They were drawn there between a man who had mastered the land and a woman who refused to abandon conviction. Below them, the waters of Coyote Springs flowed on unaware. They were the prize in a fight for the West's soul. The strike came without thunder or warning, quiet as a snake sliding through grass. A week later, in the day's hottest lull, a lone rider approached waving white. He was gaunt, jittery, unknown to Mara, and claimed to be a territorial surveyor. Rael met him with Bram and 2 hands rifles ready but lowered. The man spread a map explaining he'd come to chart water sources for a government report. "Your report is mistaken," Rael said, calm-edged with steel. "This is private land. You have no authority here," he added. "It's about progress, Mr. Blackwood," the man stammered, sweat beading. "Mr. Crow, he's a civic leader. He's petitioned." As he spoke, Mara watched from the porch and caught movement. 2 small groups of riders, 5 or 6 each, slipping along the low ridges on both sides of the valley. They were angling for the canyon, for the main spring. Crow's hand at work, noise at the door, while the real force seized the prize. Her pulse hammered. She couldn't shout. She had to warn Rael now. She backed into the house and ran for the schoolroom. She seized the slate Bram had found for her. Chalk flew as she wrote 3 bold words: "Riders on ridges." She rushed back, holding the slate high. Rael still faced the surveyor at his back to her. Bram stood just off to the side, eyes always scanning. They flicked toward the doorway for a heartbeat and saw the slate. His face didn't change, but Mara Whitlock caught the shift, the faint adjustment of his feet, the firmer set of his hands on the rifle. He gave her the smallest nod, barely there, then returned his attention to the ridgelines. A breath later, he murmured something to Rael, too low for the surveyor to catch. Rael didn't turn. He showed nothing. He kept the surveyor talking, his voice calm, almost slow, stretching the moment thin. "Progress depends on where you stand," he said evenly. "Some call a dam progress. I call it respect for the land that keeps us alive." As he spoke, Bram Cutter and the 2 hands drifted back, unhurried, taking cover by a water trough and the barn corner. Others, alerted by a signal Mara never saw, slipped from bunkhouse doors and sheds, rifles in hand, moving with practiced quiet. The surveyor's eyes darted. He sensed the trap closing. I'll return another time," he stammered, fumbling his map. "I don't believe you will," Rael said. In one swift motion, he seized the bridle and checked the horse. The first shot cracked from the eastern ridge. One of Silas Crow's men had lost patience. Wood exploded from the porch rail, inches from Rael's shoulder. The fake surveyor yelped, spurred his mount, and fled. The fight ignited. The hours that followed blurred into terror and thunder. Rael's hands were fewer, but they had cover, and knew every fold of the ground. Crow's riders were exposed on the rocks, forced to fire long. Rifles barked. Bullets sang and skipped stone. Mara rushed the children into the cellar, cool dark, smelling of earth and potatoes. She tried to steady them with a story, but her voice trembled every shot, wrenching a flinch from her. This was the lesson Rael had warned of. This was the West's true schooling. When the children were settled, she couldn't stay hidden. She climbed back up. The main room had become a command post and infirmary. Rael signaled from a window. Bram answered from another with covering fire. A young hand, Jonah Slate, lay bleeding from the shoulder. Mara went to him, at once tearing clean sheets into strips, her hands sure with the rush of purpose. Outside, the standoff dragged. Crow's men couldn't reach the spring or the house. Rael's couldn't drive them off. A deadlock. Mara knew Crow, patient, relentless, would weight them thin on bullets or resolve. She looked to Rael. His focus was iron strain etched beneath it. He was fighting for home and legacy. A desperate idea surfaced, reckless, half borrowed from books. "Blackwood," she said tight. He glanced at her eyes, dark with battle. "Stay down," he began. The north edge she pressed quickly. "You said there are 2 smaller springs. Are they near the mesas? Any cattle grazing there?" Now he gave her full attention, curiosity flickering. "Yes. A small herd in the north pasture. Crow's men are fixed on the main spring," she said, the plan forming as she spoke. "They think it's the only prize. But their horses will need water and they're exposed on those ridges. What if there's a diversion big enough to pull some away? Split them." "A stampede," Bram grunted, catching on. Rael weighed it. "Too dangerous. We can't spare men." "Not men." Mara said, steadier now. "Rocks. The geology texts, in your library one, mentions slides in these mesas. The shale's unstable, especially after last month's rains. If someone reached the north ridge above the pasture, they wouldn't need powder. Just levers, crowbars. A few hands could start a slide. The noise, the dust," she went on. "Enough to spook the herd, send it running straight toward the eastern ridge, where most of Crow's men are." Silence fell, stunned and sharp. Rael and Bram Cutter looked at Mara Whitlock as if seeing her anew. She wasn't merely a schoolteacher reciting lessons from books. She had taken theory and turned it into a weapon, practical, precise, and lethal. Rael decided at once. "Bram, take Reed Holloway and Tomas Vale. You know the place she means." Bram's grin flashed sharp and feral. "Yes, ma'am, teacher," he said with a nod to Mara. "Class is in session." The 3 slipped out, the rear of the house. What followed was the longest hour of Mara's life. Gunfire snapped and paused in ragged bursts. Then a low tremor began, a sound she felt in her teeth before she heard it. It swelled from a murmur to a roar, the noise of a mountain tearing loose. A towering cloud of dust boiled up behind the northern mesa. Seconds later, panicked bawling rolled across the valley. The stampede was loose. From the window, she saw the effect instantly. Men on the eastern ridge, now squarely in the path of 100 charging steers, lost all order. The siege unraveled as they scrambled for mounts, trying to outrun hooves and horns. "This is it," Rael shouted. "Now!" He and the remaining hands unleashed a tight volley, not at the fleeing men, but at their horses, pinning them, breaking momentum. The balance flipped. Silas Crow's force splintered, trapped between rockslide and rifle line. Minutes later, they were gone, hauling their wounded, a scattered rabble streaming out of the valley. Silence settled at last, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant lowing of cattle. Mara sagged against the wall, shaking as the adrenaline drained. Rael crossed to her rifle, loose at his side. Dust and powder streaked his face, but his eyes were steady. He said nothing. He reached out and gently took the slate she'd left on the table, chalk dust still clinging. He read the words, "Riders on ridges," then met her gaze. "Your lesson," he said quietly. Respect ringing clear for the first time was learned. Aftermath brought busy calm. Crow's men were routed, the wounded treated, the ranch breathing again. That evening, Mara sat on the porch steps until Rael joined her, settling beside her as an equal. "They won't return," he said with certainty. Crow thought he faced one man. He learned he faced a community. He watched the dusk a moment. "For years I believed keeping the world out was the only way to protect this place. I saw your ideals as weakness, an Eastern indulgence." He turned intensity soft in the twilight. "I was wrong. Today, knowledge was a weapon. You saved this valley without firing a shot. A place that only survives isn't truly alive. It needs a soul. It needs a teacher." Belonging washed over Mara. The dream she thought had died in Redemption Gulch hadn't been destroyed. It had been too small. "I'm sending a rider to the territorial capital tomorrow." Rael went on purpose in his voice. "A proposal to establish a township here, Coyote Springs. We'll build a proper school. We'll make something that endures. But a town needs a founder," he added. "It will need your guidance." Mara looked up at the vast, star-filled sky. She hadn't found the sanctuary she sought. She would help build it. "I believe," she said, a true smile reaching her eyes. "That's a lesson I'd be honored to teach." On the horizon, a new day waited, and for the first time they would face it together. This story of Mara, Whitlock, and Rael is more than survival on the old frontier. It's a reminder that strength isn't only the gun or the fence. It's resilience against injustice, the courage to hold fast to principle, and the wisdom to wield knowledge and compassion as the sharpest tools of all. Sometimes the home we seek isn't marked on a map. It's the community we build, hand by hand, grounded in respect and shared vision. If this tale of hardship, unlikely alliance, and new beginnings moved you, help us share more like it. Hit like. Share it with someone who loves grit and heart, and most of all, subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for listening. Thank you. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.